Zombie movies have been lying to you about how outbreaks actually kill. Rabies, the real disease behind the bite trope, only infects its victim 15 to 50% of the time depending on the wound. Measles, one of the most contagious diseases on Earth, still fails to infect roughly 3% of the people it touches. So today I'm breaking down the biggest outbreak myths in zombie fiction and what real epidemiology says happens instead. Starting with the wound, everyone assumes is a death sentence. The bite-only transmission myth. Pick a side before the facts arrive. Either the zombie bite is the most accurate piece of disease science pop culture ever produced, or it's the laziest shortcut a screenwriter ever leaned on. The arm gets grabbed, the teeth sink in, and 30 seconds later the eyes go glassy. Clean, dramatic, done. That single moment is a great match for a 2-hour runtime. Infection doesn't work on a runtime. Real outbreaks travel by whatever door happens to be open. Wounds, contaminated water, insect bites, animal bites, straight inoculation into the bloodstream. Several possible routes depending on the pathogen and the setting. Rabies is the closest thing science has to the movie, spreading through saliva and a puncture wound, capable of killing once symptoms show up. Even rabies only takes hold in a probabilistic range, not a guaranteed turn, and location on the body swings the odds hard. A bite to the face carries far more risk than a bite to the calf because the virus has less distance to travel to the nervous system. Apply that same logic to the fiction, and wound placement should matter there too, even if most zombie canons never bother writing that rule in. Measles blows that number out of the water in the other direction. It's one of the most contagious diseases known to exist. Airborne, brutally efficient, capable of infecting a room hours after the sick person left, and it still fails to infect roughly 1 in 10 exposed unvaccinated close contact. One of nature's most efficient human transmitters still misses. A single movie bite claiming 100% success rate is outperforming biology's top student. For many bite analog pathogens, entry through a wound or inoculation matters more than casual contact, and that root detail is what many outbreak movies skip past on the way to the next jump scare. Where the pathogen lands decides the outcome as much as whether it landed at all. Meanwhile, the sink in the background, the one nobody's pointing a camera at, is doing more damage than the mouth. Hygiene failure and water contamination are the real workhorses of disaster zone disease spread, quietly wrecking more people than any single dramatic encounter ever could. Writers keep stretching the bite rule wider anyway, adding scratches, then saliva, then blood. A common explanation is that a single route bite pathogen spreads too slowly for a 90-minute plot, so the rule gets expanded to keep the outbreak moving. That's a recurring argument in comment sections under zombie trailer, fans litigating which fluid counts and which doesn't. Say the bite lands anyway, and the pathogen actually takes hold. The movie gives you 30 seconds and a change of eye color. Biology has a very different appointment schedule, and that silent interval is where a lot of real outbreak damage gets done. The instant turn incubation myth. The scariest infected person in a real outbreak looks completely fine. They're standing behind you in line at the pharmacy buying orange juice, complaining about the weather. That gap between exposure and symptoms is where the actual danger lives. Movies treat it as dead air. A few seconds of clutching a wound before the eyes go white and the screaming starts. Real infection runs on a slower clock because a virus has to physically invade cells, hijack their machinery, and copy itself before it can produce a single symptom. That process takes biological steps, measured in stages, not a switch flip. Rabies is the closest real analog to a zombie, and it still refuses to cooperate with the movie time. Exposure comes first, then a known progression toward neurologic disease, and that progression is exactly why post-exposure treatment still works if it's given before symptoms start. Doctors are racing a countdown, but the countdown is measured in days and weeks, not the length of a chase scene. That window exists because the virus needs time to travel. Travel means opportunity. Part of that opportunity is architecture. The blood-brain barrier sits between a pathogen and the central nervous system specifically to slow this kind of takeover. One of the reasons instant brain hijacking reads as pure fiction. Timing also shifts with dose, route of entry, and the host's own immune response, and factor all three in, and the tidy movie countdown falls apart completely. A universal clock applies to nobody. This is the part that turns the earlier point about chance into something worse. If infection is a matter of probability rather than certain, stretch that probability across days of incubation, and you get a person walking around contagious and unaware, doing every ordinary thing a person does. They go to work, they ride the bus, they hug their kid goodnight, the bandage on their arm looks clean because it is and the danger nobody can see is exactly the danger that spreads. That's the trade the slow burn makes. Medicine gets a window to intervene, and the outbreak gets days of cover to become somebody else's problem too. One infection turns into a dozen quiet handshakes before anyone has a reason to be afraid, and by the time somebody does, the trail behind them is already tangled across a dozen households, buses, and shift changes, the kind of spread that takes contact tracers weeks to even partially reconstruct. So the infection is already loose, Already invisible, already carried by people who look healthy. This is the moment the movie cuts to men behind a barricade firing into a crowd until the ammunition runs out. That scene is a fantasy about a completely different profession, and the real one has a much stranger toolkit: the bomb instinct. The genre has a recurring instinct. When the military finally shows up, its go-to idea is often dropping a bomb on the city. The scene plays like strategy. Some general in a bunker looks at a map, says the quarantine has failed, and orders an airstrike on a place that is still full of living, breathing, uninfected people. It feels decisive. It feels like the movie finally trusts the army to do something. Real outbreak doctrine does not include that option at all, and a competent command structure works to avoid it entirely, because a bomb kills the healthy and the infected in the same blast radius and burns the one thing you actually needed, which was information about who got sick and how. The layered version of a real response looks almost boring next to that fireball. Surveillance to find where the contact network runs, cordons and checkpoints to slow movement between zones, evacuation routes for the people who are still clean, trucks hauling water, generators, and medical supplies into isolation wards, because dehydration and untreated wounds are among the biggest preventable killers once the immediate danger is past. The United States biodefense playbook is built around isolation, protective equipment, and controlled movement, treating the whole event as a public health operation with soldiers helping run the perimeter instead of headline. Disease spreads through contact, not through a horde sprinting at a fence line. So the actual weapon is deciding who is allowed to go where, wearing what, standing how close to whom. A checkpoint stops more infections than a machine gun nest ever will. The ordinary person from earlier, the one with the bandaged arm still boiling water and still standing in line, survives or doesn't based on whether that checkpoint exists, not on whether a hero can shoot straight. That is the detail the genre keeps skipping past on its way to the explosion. The genre needs the checkpoint to fail, though, because a working one ends the story before Act 2 starts. So the script gives you a general who orders the airstrike, a comm system that mysteriously drops out at the worst moment, and a chain of command that splits into 3 arguing factions right when it needs to move fastest. Real coordination failures do happen, and they often involve exactly that: confusion between civilian and military authority, radios on the wrong channel, orders arriving late. Movies skip the part where that confusion gets fixed by people doing unglamorous logistics work for 11 straight days. A truck delivering clean water has never once sold a ticket, even when the response is clumsy, even when the authority is split 3 ways and the communication is a mess. The world does not end on a single Tuesday night. That image of every capital city dark at once is doing something dishonest with a map, and it is far from the only thing the genre gets wrong about what actually kills you once the outbreak starts. The synchronized fall. Every zombie movie has the same shot. Camera pulls back to a spinning globe, and one by one the cities light up red until the whole planet's on fire in under a minute. That montage is the biggest lie in the genre, and it's not even a close second. Real outbreaks do not travel like a light switch wired to every bulb in the house. They travel like traffic, along flight paths, through commuter rail, down highways, one infected passenger and one delayed connection at a time. That gap between cities is density, mobility, and how fast local leadership acted, and it means 2 cities on the same continent can be living in completely different months. Even the nastiest pathogens on record don't infect everyone they touch. Measles is about as contagious as it gets, and it still doesn't convert every single person in a room into a carrier. Biology has limits. Contact patterns have limits. An outbreak spreads through chains of exposure, and every broken link in that chain is somebody who never got sick at all. Here's the part the montage skips entirely. The first move in a real outbreak isn't collapse, it's containment. Surveillance systems flag clusters. Hospitals isolate patients. Contact tracers start calling people who sat 2 rows away on a train. It's slow, unglamorous, and it buys time, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, before anything close to a breakdown starts. For the whole planet to go dark at once, you'd need every one of those systems failing at the same time, in every country, with 0 variation in response. That has never happened. Not with plague, not with flu pandemics, not with anything on record. What actually happens is uneven. Some regions get hammered, others watch the news and go back to work. Picture the actual map, not the movie one. One city under a hard curfew, ambulances stacked outside a hospital that ran out of beds 3 days ago. 200 miles away, someone's mad because their flight got canceled and they're stuck in an airport lounge eating an $8 sandwich. Both of those are happening on the same Tuesday. That's the part that should scare you more than the montage ever did. The person with a fresh bandage on their arm, waiting to find out if the bite got them, still has to go to work Thursday because their city hasn't shut down yet. They're checking their phone and watching people 3 states over post-vacation photos like nothing's wrong. Nobody's coming to make it official. There's no scene where a general declares the world over. It just keeps almost being fine, one town at a time, for a lot longer than anyone would choose. And in that patchwork, something has to fail first. It will not be the whole thing going dark in one cinematic shot. It starts with the thing coming out of your tap, and with the machine people buy to feel safe that quietly kills them in their own kitchen. The water runs out, 1 gallon. That's the daily ration disaster guidance says a person needs just to drink and stay functional. And it's the number that starts turning an outbreak into a logistics problem, arguably before it ever turns into a monster problem. The math gets ugly fast. A household of 4 burns through a case and a half of bottled water a day just standing still, and that's before anyone factors in cooking, hygiene, or a fever that needs fluids. Tap water, well water, and creek water all become suspect the moment sanitation infrastructure goes down, and treatment plants are exactly the kind of system that degrades quietly instead of exploding on camera for the trailer. The fix isn't complicated. Boil it hard for 1 full minute and it's safe to drink, which means one of the most important survival skills in a real outbreak is a chore your grandmother did every winter without a script credit. Compare that to the generator sitting in Kevin's garage. Guidance is blunt about it. 20 feet from any building, never indoors, never near a window, because the exhaust is odorless carbon monoxide and it kills people faster than almost anything a zombie could manage. The appliance bought for safety carries a documented body count when it's used wrong. That's the same slow-motion cruelty the previous staggered collapse ran on, except now it's sitting in the kitchen instead of failing somewhere off-screen where nobody has to watch it happen. These rarely arrive together. Fuel can run low while water is still technically fine, and water can turn bad while sanitation is still holding on, because the sequence depends on the disaster and the infrastructure behind it. Generator misuse enters the picture somewhere in the middle of all of it, usually by someone doing exactly what they think keeps their family alive. Preparedness guidance treats water, fuel, and backup power as distinct problems, and in practice, they tend to hit on separate timelines, which is the kind of staggered arrival a 2-hour movie has zero patience for. The instant blackout is a directing choice. So picture the actual person. Clean bandage on one arm, gallon jug in the other hand, boiling water on a stove that's rationing its last few days of propane. That's the whole disaster movie, minus the sprint through a shopping mall and the guy who inexplicably knows how to hotwire anything. So, the survivor is boiling water, rationing fuel, keeping the generator outside, doing the quiet, unglamorous work of staying alive 1 gallon at a time. The movie needs that person to have an enemy, so it invents one out of the neighbors. It assumes the day the power flickers is the day everyone becomes a threat. And that assumption falls apart the moment you look at what people actually do when the lights go out. The Raider fantasy. Picture the scene every zombie movie promises you. Day 3, the power flickers out, and your neighbor Gary grabs a machete and starts eyeing your pantry like it's the last can of beans on Earth. That's the fantasy the genre sells you every single time. The real version usually looks like Gary running an extension cord across the street to the elderly couple at number 4, because his generator can spare the amps and they can't spare the medication that needs refrigerating. Cooperation is usually the baseline during a crisis, not the twist ending. That single fact undoes half the genre. Disaster sociology has tracked this pattern across floods, blackouts, hurricanes, earthquakes, and pandemics, and the finding holds up with grim consistency. People queue, people share information, people check on the elderly couple. The instinct that shows up first, before the panic and before the looting, is organizing around family, shelter, food, and who has a working phone. Real emergencies still produce mixed behavior happening on the same block at the same hour. Somewhere on that street, a genuine opportunist is testing a door handle, watching which houses left for the shelter and which ones are still lit up. That person is real. He's outnumbered and he's working alone, exploiting one weak point instead of declaring war on the neighborhood. The lady 2 houses down organizing a supply rotation carries on with her list. She doesn't know he exists yet. This is the same trap the movies fall into with the boiling water and the fuel rationing, just scaled up from one household to an entire population. A body shuts down organ by organ under stress, and a society runs the same way. Police stop responding to some calls before others. Hospitals triage before they collapse. Utilities usually go down street by street as crews chase individual faults. though a cascading grid failure can occasionally black out an entire metro area within minutes, the way it did across the northeastern United States in 2003, and again in 1965. Order erodes unevenly, in patches, block by block. While most people are still following the same social scripts they followed the week before, ask yourself why the genre keeps skipping that part. A tense supply run makes better footage than 40 people calmly forming a line outside a pharmacy. Chaos is cinematic. A neighborhood watch schedule is not. So the camera finds the one guy with the machete and builds an entire civilization around him, because a story about organized decency doesn't sell popcorn. Here's the harder version to sit with, the one that actually matches how these things go. Give the story everything it wants. Say, order does break. Say the neighbors do turn on each other. Say the worst version comes true eventually, 3 weeks in, when the food runs low and the fear compounds until Gary's machete finally makes sense. There is still one character the movie needs that biology will not supply. Something that keeps moving, keeps chasing, keeps hunting for weeks on end without eating, without sleeping, without ever refueling the engine that makes movement possible. The energy debt. Picture a zombie sprinting full speed for 6 days straight. Many of these movies ask you to accept exactly that. And it's the same lie as a car engine running with the fuel line cut. The previous section showed you a society with its own incubation period, weeks of quiet collapse before anyone admitted the water was contaminated. That same clock is ticking inside the thing chasing you, and it's ticking faster. Movement costs energy. Every step requires oxygen delivery, muscle contraction, and cellular metabolism converting glucose into usable fuel. A supply chain that needs a working heart, working lungs, and a liver that hasn't started liquefying. A corpse has none of that running. The heart isn't pumping, so there's no oxygen reaching muscle tissue, and without oxygen, those muscles can't keep contracting the way a sprint or a chase demands. Real bodies hit fatigue, dehydration, and loss of coordination within hours of heart exertion. And those limits apply whether the nervous system is rewired, possessed, or reanimated by whatever fictional mechanism you like. Say the virus somehow keeps the brain firing. The tendons still tear under repeated impact. The joints still grind without synovial fluid keeping them lubricated. Muscle fiber breaks down and doesn't repair because repair requires protein synthesis, and protein synthesis requires a functioning cell, and a dead cell can't manufacture anything. A sprinting zombie is a machine spending everything it has on the first outing, with zero mechanism to refuel before the second one. Here's the part that breaks the fast zombie argument specifically. Plenty of fans debate whether sprinters or shamblers are the scarier threat, but speed only determines how quickly the debt comes due. A shambler burns its energy reserves over days. A sprinter burns the same reserves in minutes. Both hit the same wall because both are running a body on stored fuel alone, with nothing coming in to replace it. Heat makes it worse. Warmer temperatures accelerate most of the processes breaking that tissue down, though extreme dry heat can occasionally mummify a corpse and stall decay instead, which means a body that's supposedly getting more dangerous as the outbreak spreads is usually losing structural integrity faster with every degree the thermometer climbs. Picture the joints seizing, the tendons snapping, one system after another shutting down mid-outbreak, while the movie keeps filming it like a machine that never needs maintenance. Somewhere in that town is the person with the bandage on their arm, still boiling water, still waiting to find out if their own body is about to start the same countdown. The thing hunting them was never given more time than they were. It just spends its clock faster and calls it hunger. An engine that runs without fuel is impossible enough. Now start the second clock, the one that begins the instant the heart stops, and let the heat turn it forward. The thing chasing the survivor is losing the war with its own tissue faster than it could ever lose a foot race. The rot clock. The zombie in every movie is a corpse that got an exemption from biology, and biology never signed off on it. Heat is the thing that turns a body into a horror icon, and the thing that dismantles it on the exact same schedule. Autolysis starts the process from the inside within hours. Bacteria and insects finish the job from the outside. Temperature sets the pace for all of it, and warm, humid conditions. A climate the genre returns to again and again. Run that pace fastest. A corpse left outside in 90-degree heat is a countdown with a face. Joints stiffen and then break down entirely. Soft tissue sloughs off in ways that change balance, movement, even the shape of a face you'd recognize. A body that has been reanimated for 6 months in a Georgia summer does not look like the guy from the poster. It looks like a puddle with opinions. That tracks with a real shift in the genre itself. Since the early 2000s, zombie fiction has drifted hard away from the rotting corpse and toward something alive, something infected, something with a functioning circulatory system. Nothing on record confirms exactly why every writer made that call, but the pattern lines up too well to ignore. It looks as though writers needed a version of the monster that does not answer to decomposition. So they moved the horror into a living host instead of a dead one, because a dead one has an expiration date and nobody wants their villain to melt on a schedule. Every myth this video has taken apart points at the same gap between the instant version and the true one. The virus that was supposed to flip a switch in a night runs for days in a real body. The bite that was supposed to be a guaranteed death sentence sometimes isn't. The bullet to the head that was supposed to be the only rule has exceptions written into actual medical case files. Each one of those was time working exactly the way time works, refusing to compress itself for the sake of a 2-minute scene. The corpse rotting in the heat is the same argument with a body attached. It cannot stay a monster forever because nothing organic gets to stay anything forever. That looks like the whole trick the genre needed, and the one thing biology was never going to grant it, which is the real difference between the movie and the person still living through this. The screen version dies in one dramatic night, and the credits roll. The person with the clean bandage on their arm does not get credits. They get a morning, then another one. They boil a gallon of water because that's what today requires, not because a plot demands it, and they do that again tomorrow and the day after for 11 months, waiting for news that never arrives in one clean announcement. The monster in every zombie movie is a body that has been exempted from time, and time is the one thing no pathogen has ever repealed, which is why the honest version of the apocalypse is a corpse coming apart in the heat, while the survivor who buried it is still boiling a gallon of water a day, 11 months in, waiting for a collapse that keeps arriving in installments. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.